The air in Hampton Park, Charleston, South Carolina, wasn't simply hot. It was intimate. It pressed close like a damp palm against the back of your neck, carrying the soft sweetness of jasmine and the river's muddy breath. Late afternoon light spilled through live oaks draped in Spanish moss, turning the park's paths into long ribbons of gold and shadow. Near a quiet curve of walkway where tourists thinned out and locals reclaimed the space, Maya Reed sat in her wheelchair with the calm focus of someone building a world from small, deliberate movements. She was 28, with dark eyes that missed nothing, and a messy bun that had given up fighting humidity hours ago. A lightweight sketchboard rested across her lap, clipped into place with a custom strap, and her fingers, stained faintly with charcoal, moved with practiced certainty. Her chair was sleek, graphite-colored, and clearly not an afterthought. It fit her like a tool fits a craftsperson, a way to move through life without apology. At her left wheel, a golden retriever lay half in shade, half in sunlight, as if he'd chosen the border on purpose. Sonny was 3, honey gold with a slightly darker ridge along his back, his fur feathered at the legs and tail, like he'd been designed to look soft while doing serious work. His service vest was off for the moment, folded neatly beside Maya's bag, but he behaved like the vest was still on. His head rested on his paws, yet his eyes tracked everything: joggers, bicycles, kids weaving between benches, the flutter of a squirrel's tail. Every few minutes, he lifted his chin to check Maya's breathing, then settled again when she stayed steady. Maya paused her sketching and reached down to scratch behind his ear, right at the place that made his tail thump once against the grass. "You're melting," she murmured. "I swear Charleston invents new ways to be sticky." Sonny huffed softly, an affectionate sound, then nudged his nose toward her ankle, his small reminder that he was there, and that she didn't have to carry the whole day alone. Maya smiled despite herself and returned to the page. She was working on the oaks, trying to catch the way the moss hung like a slow-motion waterfall. The gallery show was small, an emerging artist's wall in a local space down King Street, but it mattered. After the accident, after the months of learning ramps and doorways and how quickly strangers could decide her story for her, the show was a line she'd drawn in her own life. I'm still here. I still make things. For a while, the park stayed kind. Then a sound tore through the hush like a bottle thrown at a stained glass window, the guttural, obnoxious roar of a performance engine. A metallic blue convertible slid along the perimeter road and stopped too hard, tires complaining against the asphalt. Music slammed out of its speakers, heavy bass bouncing off the trees, as if the park were a club that hadn't agreed to be one. 3 young men climbed out laughing, the kind of laughter that assumed the world existed for their entertainment. They looked sculpted from the same catalog: expensive polos, boat shoes with no socks, sunglasses even under shade. The leader was tall and blonde, with hair styled to look careless in a way that took effort. His grin was lazy, bored, and sharp at the edges. Carter Langford III, though Maya didn't know the name yet, moved like he belonged anywhere he placed his feet. His friends followed like satellites. One, Mason Hargrove, was stockier with a thick neck and a red flush that suggested he drank as a hobby. The other, Tyler Quinn, was lanky and uneasy, smiling too quickly as if he needed permission to breathe. Carter's gaze scanned the park with predatory boredom until it landed on Maya, and then, like a magnet finding metal, it slid to Sonny. "Well, would you look at that?" Carter said, loud enough that Maya's stomach tightened. "A golden boy. Bet he thinks he runs the place." Mason chuckled and scooped up a small twig. He tossed it toward Sonny like he was feeding a trick. "Fetch, dude, fetch." Sonny didn't move. He rose from lying to sitting with no wasted motion and placed his body between Maya's chair and the approaching men. Not aggressive, just present, a living shield. Maya's hand stilled on her sketchboard. She'd learned painfully that the world contained people who heard "please" as a challenge. "He's a service dog," she called, voice firm, the way she'd practiced in mirrors when she didn't want fear to show. "Please leave us alone." Carter stepped closer, grinning wider, eyes flicking down to Maya's wheelchair as if it were an invitation. "Service dog," he repeated, making the words sound like a joke. "What service? Looking cute?" Tyler's laugh came out thin and uncertain. "Dude, he's big." Sonny's mouth stayed closed. but a low rumble vibrated in his chest, more warning than threat. Maya felt it through the air like a change in pressure. "Back up," she said, calmer than she felt. "You're in his space, and mine." Something shifted in Carter's face. The amusement drained, replaced by a sudden, cold malice, like a candle snuffed out to reveal the dark behind it. People like him weren't used to boundaries. They weren't used to a woman in a chair telling them no as if it mattered. "You're telling me what to do?" Carter asked, voice low now. He pulled a metal flask from his pocket, took a casual sip, and the sharp scent of whiskey cut through the humid air. Maya's throat tightened. Hampton Park wasn't dangerous in the obvious ways. It was dangerous in the quiet ways, when no one wanted to be the first to intervene. "I'm asking you to go," Maya said, holding his gaze. "We're done." Carter smiled again, but it wasn't bored now. It was deliberate. "Nah," he said. "I think you need to learn manners." Before Maya could react, Mason stepped in on her left and grabbed her wheel handle. Tyler hesitated, then moved to the other side and clamped onto the right wheel, locking her in place. The chair didn't move. Maya's pulse spiked so fast she felt dizzy. "Don't touch my chair!" she snapped, panic clawing up her throat. She tried to push back, but their hands held her steady like she was furniture. Sonny's rumble deepened. He stood, ears forward, muscles taut beneath his golden coat. Carter's eyes glittered. "Ah!" he cooed, stepping toward Sonny. "You gonna bark at me?" He flicked the metal flask cap with his thumb. It struck Sonny's nose, hard. Sonny yelped, a sharp pain sound that made Maya's heart lurch. The dog shook his head, eyes watering, but he stayed between them anyway. Maya's voice broke into something raw. "Stop it!" Carter's friends laughed, Mason loud, Tyler more like a nervous cough. "Hold her," Carter said casually, and those two hands tightened on Maya's wheels. Sonny couldn't ignore that. His training screamed restraint, but his bond screamed louder. He lunged forward, not to attack, but to push Carter back from Maya. Carter moved first. His boat shoe drove into Sonny's ribs with a vicious kick. The sound wasn't cinematic. It was horrible, soft, dull, and final. Sonny collapsed to the grass with a strangled whine. Breath knocked from him. Maya screamed. It wasn't a word. It was anguish-made sound. Carter stepped closer to her chair, whiskey breath heavy, and yanked her hair back with one hand, forcing her chin up. "You shut up," he hissed. Then, open palm, he slapped her. The crack echoed under the oaks. Maya's cheek exploded with pain and humiliation, tears springing without permission. Carter shoved her head to the side, making her look at Sonny as the dog tried to drag himself upright, wheezing. "Watch," Carter whispered, almost delighted. "Watch what happens when your mutt forgets his place." Tyler's face went pale. "Carter, man!" "Kick him," Carter ordered, and Tyler flinched like he'd been struck. He lifted his foot anyway, because fear of Carter was easier than the cost of being decent. The first kick landed. Sonny cried out. Maya's whole body shook. 200 yards away, on the jogging loop that circled the park, Jack Mercer was finishing his run. He was 36, built lean and dense, moving with the smooth endurance of someone who'd spent years running because survival demanded it. Short brown hair was dark with sweat. His eyes, gray, focused, were the kind that didn't drift. No headphones. Awareness was habit. The yelp of a dog sliced through the park's normal noise. Then Maya's scream, raw, desperate, unmistakably human. Jack's pace changed without hesitation. He pivoted off the path, cut across the grass, and vaulted a low hedge with a speed that didn't look like panic. It looked like decision. In a heartbeat, he saw the scene the way he'd been trained to see any threat. One woman restrained, one dog injured, 3 aggressors. Jack didn't shout. A warning was a gift you gave when you still believed someone might deserve it. His first move was silent. He came up behind Mason and hooked an arm around the man's neck in a rear choke that cut off air and arrogance in one clean line. Mason's hands flew up, clawing, but Jack's forearm was a steel cable. 3 seconds. Mason went limp. Jack released him and let him fold to the ground like a dropped jacket. Tyler spun, eyes wide, and Jack stepped into him with a palm strike to the solar plexus. Dull impact, no show, just function. Tyler crumpled, gasping, unable to breathe. Carter stumbled backward, shock flattening his face. What the? Jack's gaze locked onto him, flat and terrifyingly calm. Carter's bravado tried to surface. Hey man, it was just… You call that a joke? Jack's voice was low, steady, and colder than the park's shade. Carter's eyes flicked to his friends on the ground. For the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. Jack moved one step forward, not rushing, not posturing. Sonny wheezed in the grass, trying to rise, eyes fixed on Maya. Jack's attention snapped to the dog, then to Maya's red cheek, then back to Carter with a controlled disgust that made Carter recoil. Get them, Jack said, nodding at Tyler and Mason. Now. Carter hesitated, then scrambled to comply, hauling Tyler up and dragging Mason's limp weight by the shoulders. He didn't dare come close again. This isn't over, he spat, but his voice cracked around the words. Jack didn't answer. He simply watched until the convertible tore away, leaving the smell of burnt rubber and expensive cologne behind. The park went quiet in a way that felt violent. Maya sat trembling, held in place now only by her own shock. Sonny lay on his side, breath shallow, golden fur trembling with each inhale. Jack approached slowly and dropped into a crouch near the dog, hands hovering before touching. Hey, buddy, he murmured, voice gentler, as if he'd turned a dial inside himself. You friendly? Maya nodded, tears spilling. Yes, he's my service dog, Sonny. Jack's jaw tightened at the name, as if it didn't match what had just happened. He checked Sonny's ribs with careful pressure, the touch of someone who knew how bodies broke. Sonny whimpered but didn't pull away. He needs a vet, Jack said. Now! Maya's hands shook on her wheels. My van, she rasped. 2 blocks, ramp. Jack didn't waste time asking permission again. He gathered Maya's dropped sketchboard and bag, moving with quiet efficiency, and then, because Maya couldn't, he scooped Sonny up with a surprising gentleness, cradling the golden retriever's weight against his chest, as if Sonny were something precious, not just heavy. Sonny's head lolled for a second, then he forced his eyes open, searching until he found Maya. His tail gave one weak thump. Maya made a broken sound, half sob, half relief. I'm here, she whispered to him, voice shaking. I'm here. Jack carried Sonny beside her as she pushed hard toward the street, every squeak of her wheels suddenly too loud, every shadow too sharp. The sunlight still fell through moss like lace, but the park no longer felt like a painting. It felt like a lesson. And as Maya led them toward her van, toward the vet, toward whatever came next, she realized something else too. Those men weren't done. People like that never stopped because someone asked. They stopped only when the world made stopping inevitable. The emergency veterinary clinic on Meeting Street smelled like antiseptic and wet fur, the kind of sharp, clean sting that made Maya's throat tighten, because it reminded her how close pain lived to tenderness. The waiting room was bright in an unforgiving way. White walls, stainless steel counters, a TV mounted too high playing a muted local news loop. Maya rolled in with her hands trembling on the push rims, and Jack Mercer followed, carrying Sonny like a fragile, breathing bundle of gold. Sonny's head lolled against Jack's forearm, eyes half open, chest moving in shallow, careful pulls, as if each breath had to be negotiated. Even injured, he kept trying to twist his muzzle toward Maya, searching for her voice, her scent, her steady. I'm here, Maya whispered again and again, because saying it was the only thing that kept her from dissolving. A technician hurried out, young, freckled, hair tucked into a cap, her gaze snapping between the dog and Maya's bruised cheek. We've got him, she said, tone practiced but soft. Ma'am, are you his handler? Maya nodded. Service dog, she managed. His name is Sonny. Jack lowered Sonny onto a gurney as gently as if he were placing a child into bed. Sonny made a small sound, more air than wine, and the technician's face pinched with sympathy. Let's get you breathing easier, handsome, she murmured, then motioned for another staff member to wheel Sonny away. Maya's hands flew forward before the gurney moved. Sonny's gaze locked onto hers, his ears flattened, and for a second he looked frightened, not of the clinic, not of pain, but of being separated. Maya leaned in, pressing her forehead briefly to his, feeling the heat of him, the dampness of his breath. You did your job, she whispered. You did it perfectly. I'll be right here. Sonny's tail twitched once, weak like a promise. Then the gurney rolled through swinging doors, and Maya was left staring at a blank wall, as if someone had taken the floor out from under her. Jack didn't crowd her. He stood a pace back, arms loose at his sides, posture deceptively relaxed in a way that still held readiness. He looked ordinary in jeans and a worn running shirt, but there was nothing casual about his eyes. "Sit?" he asked, gesturing to a corner where 2 chairs had been pushed against the wall. Maya hated needing help, hated how the world could turn her into a problem to be solved, but she also hated being brave when she was exhausted. She rolled into the space and let her shoulders drop. The moment she stopped moving, the pain in her cheeks surged, and she realized she'd been clenching her jaw so hard, her teeth ached. "They held my chair," she said, words spilling out before she could control them. Like I was furniture." Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't say the easy thing. He didn't offer a hollow, "I'm sorry." He nodded once, like a man receiving a fact that required action. "I saw," he said simply. A tall veterinarian came out about 20 minutes later. Dr. Daniel Klein was in his early 40s, with kind brown eyes behind rectangular glasses and the calm hands of someone who'd spent his life touching frightened animals without making them feel trapped. His salt and pepper hair was clipped short, and his voice carried the gentle authority of a person who didn't have to raise it to be heard. "Ms. Reed?" he asked, looking directly at Maya first, human to human, before glancing toward Jack. "I'm Dr. Klein. Sonny's stable." Maya's lungs loosened in a shaky exhale. He's in pain, Doctor," Klein said honestly. "But he's a tough dog. We're doing x-rays now. He's got bruising along the ribs and abdomen. We're watching for internal injury." He paused, and his gaze flicked to the red bloom on Maya's cheek. "And you. That looks like a fresh contusion." Maya's fingers tightened on her lap. "I'm fine, Doctor." Klein didn't argue, but his eyes held a quiet insistence. "If you feel dizzy, nauseated, or your vision changes, you need to be checked too. Head injuries don't always announce themselves politely." Jack's attention snapped to her face with a new intensity. Maya's chest tightened, irritation sparking. She didn't want to be managed. But the truth was, she had felt dizzy, just for a second right after the slap, like the world had tilted. She swallowed and looked away. Dr. Klein nodded once, as if he'd filed that for later. "We'll update you as soon as we have imaging," he said, then stepped back through the doors. The waiting room clock ticked too loud. Maya stared at the floor tiles and kept seeing Sonny's golden flank crumpling under a shoe. She kept hearing the crack of skin on palm. She kept replaying her own scream and hating how it sounded. Raw, helpless, like a door being kicked in. Jack sat down finally, not too close, but close enough that she could feel the steadiness of another person's presence without being crowded. "Do you have someone you can call?" he asked. Maya laughed once, humorless. "My parents are in Ohio. We talk, but not about this. And my friends are artists. They mean well. They also freeze when things get ugly." Jack nodded, as if that made complete sense. "Then you call me," he said. And it wasn't flirtation or savior talk. It was a boundary he set like a fact. Maya didn't know what to do with that. She didn't even know his full story. She only knew he had moved, like violence was an old language, and then handled Sonny like he was made of glass. "Your name's Jack," she said, grasping for something solid. "Jack Mercer," he confirmed. He paused, then added, "I'm in town on leave. Not here permanently." Maya heard the unspoken warning. Don't build a castle on a bridge. Before she could answer, Dr. Klein returned holding an X-ray printout on a light board. "Okay," he said, voice careful. "Sonny has 2 fractured ribs on the right side, hairline but painful, and significant soft tissue bruising. No obvious internal bleeding on imaging, which is good. We're keeping him overnight for observation and pain control. He'll need rest for weeks." Maya's vision blurred. 2 broken ribs. Her throat tightened with guilt, so thick it felt physical. "My fault," she whispered without meaning to. Jack's head turned sharply. "No," he said, quiet but absolute. Dr. Klein's eyes softened. "Service dogs are trained to protect in non-violent ways," he said gently. "He did what he was trained to do. Stay with you. He's injured because other people chose cruelty. Maya pressed her lips together until they hurt, as if pain could keep her from crying. Can I see him? Dr. Klein nodded. Briefly, he's sedated, but he'll know your voice. In the treatment area, Sonny lay on a padded mat, with a monitor clipped to his tongue and a bandage wrap around his torso. His chest rose slowly, steadier now, but each breath still looked careful. When Maya rolled close and said his name, Sonny's eyelids fluttered. His gaze found her, unfocused but determined. His tail moved once, a weak sweep that still somehow carried the same message as always. I'm here. Maya's hand shook as she stroked the fur along his neck. You did so good, she whispered. You did so good. Sonny tried to lift his head and failed. He made a small huff of frustration. Jack crouched on the other side, palm hovering, then gently pressing Sonny's shoulder as if to tell him to stay down. Rest, buddy, Jack murmured. You already won. The words hit Maya unexpectedly. Won. Not in a fight sense, in a survival sense. Back in the waiting room, paperwork arrived like an avalanche. Numbers, consent forms, estimates. Maya's stomach sank at the total. Service dogs were priceless, but vet bills still had a cruel way of being very real. She reached for her wallet, then stopped. Jack had already pulled out his card. No, Maya said sharply, pride flaring. I can... Jack didn't look at her, but his voice stayed calm. You can pay me back later if you want, he said. Right now, your dog needs care. This is not the moment to prove you can do everything alone. The truth stung because it was true. Maya swallowed hard and let her hands fall to her lap. Thank you, she managed, and hated how small gratitude could feel next to violence. When she left the clinic, Charleston's night air wrapped around her like wet cloth. The streetlights blurred slightly, and for a second she felt that dizziness again. She tightened her grip on the chair rims. Jack noticed. He didn't comment. He simply walked on the side where he could catch her if she tipped. Outside he paused. Police, he said. We file a report. Maya wanted to agree. Maya also wanted to disappear, but Sonny's fractured ribs flashed behind her eyes, and anger rose like a tide. Okay, she said, voice steadier than she felt. The police station downtown was a brick building that smelled faintly of old coffee and fluorescent heat. The desk sergeant, Officer Dale Rusk, looked like he'd been tired for 20 years. Mid-40s, thinning hair, a rumpled uniform, eyes that slid over people without really seeing them. His gaze flicked to Maya's cheek, then to Jack, then away. What can I do for you? He asked, already reaching for a form as if the answer didn't matter. Maya told the story. She kept it clean. Names she didn't have, descriptions she did, the blue convertible, the assault, the service dog. She even remembered the license plate because fear had sharpened her mind in certain ways. Rusk typed slowly, expression blank. Then he entered the plate into the system and something changed. Not dramatically, but enough to make Maya's stomach drop. Rusk's lips pressed together. His eyes narrowed in an appraisal that wasn't about truth. It was about consequences. That plate, he said, voice shifting into something careful, comes back to a Langford vehicle. Maya blinked. So? Rusk leaned back in his chair with a sigh that carried a warning. The Langfords are prominent. Jack's posture tightened, almost imperceptibly. Maya felt heat crawl up her neck. Prominent people can still commit crimes, she said. Rusk gave her a look that pretended to be sympathetic. Ma'am, I'm just telling you how this plays. Big dog lunges at a young man. Young man panics. Things get heated. Maya's hands curled into fists in her lap. Sonny didn't lunge until they grabbed my chair. Rusk shrugged. They'll say different. And they have resources. Jack spoke then, voice even but edged. You're filing the report, right? Rusk tapped the keyboard with exaggerated patience. I'm filing it, he said, as if doing so was a favor. He printed a receipt number and slid it across the counter like a bone tossed to keep a dog quiet. Maya stared at the paper. It felt flimsy. You'll contact me? She asked. Rusk's eyes had already moved past her to the next problem in his day. If there's something to contact you about. Outside, Maya's breath came shallow. He's not going to do anything, she whispered. Jack didn't disagree. He simply said, Not alone, he won't. It bombed 2 hours later, back in Maya's studio, a converted space above a closed boutique with tall, arched windows and the sharp, comforting smell of oil paint. Her phone rang from an unknown number. Maya stared at it, heart hammering, and almost didn't answer. She did anyway, because avoidance had already cost Sunny 2 ribs. Hello? The voice on the line was smooth, educated, and chillingly controlled. Ms. Maya Reed, my name is Malcolm Pritchard. I represent the Langford family. Maya's skin went cold. Jack had insisted on walking her home and checking the locks. He was in the room now, leaning against the counter as if he'd made himself part of the architecture. His eyes lifted when he heard the name. Maya put the phone on speaker without thinking. Your son assaulted me, Maya said, voice shaking with fury. He kicked my service dog. There seems to be a misunderstanding, Pritchard replied, tone almost bored. Carter Langford has expressed regret. He perceived your dog as aggressive. Jack's mouth tightened. Maya's laugh came out sharp. Aggressive? He was protecting me while I was being held. Pritchard's voice didn't change. The Langfords are prepared to cover your veterinary expenses in full. In exchange, you will sign a standard confidentiality agreement. No social media, no press, no further reports. The offer landed like a slap all over again. No, Maya said, and the word surprised her with its clarity. There was a pause, brief, precise. When Pritchard spoke again, the warmth was gone entirely. Then we will protect our family from false allegations. A countersuit for defamation will be filed. Witnesses will attest your dog initiated the incident. You will likely lose. Maya's throat tightened. And, Pritchard continued, as if reading from a menu, you rent your studio, correct? Your landlord maintains contracts with Langford Development. Business relationships have expectations. Maya's hands shook so hard the phone vibrated against the table. Jack pushed off the counter, eyes flat. Is that a threat? He asked into the speaker. Silence. Then cool curiosity. And who am I speaking with? Jack Mercer, Jack said. You called my friend. You're done. Pritchard's exhale was almost a laugh. Mr. Mercer, I'd advise you to stay within your lane. Jack's gaze didn't flicker. My lane is keeping people safe, he said. Try again, and we'll see what lane you're in. The line clicked dead. For a moment, the studio felt too quiet, like all sound had been sucked out. Maya stared at the blank phone screen. They know my landlord, she whispered. They can take this place. Jack's voice softened, but his eyes stayed hard. They can try, he said. But now we know what game they're playing. Maya's breathing started to stutter, panic threatening to spill. Then she remembered Sunny's tail thump, weak but stubborn, and forced air into her lungs. What do I do? Giddy, she asked, and the question hurt because she hated needing to ask it. Jack didn't answer with comfort. He answered with a plan. First, he said, we protect Sunny. Second, we document everything. Third, we find someone who isn't bought. Maya swallowed. The city outside her arched windows hummed with nightlife, oblivious. Inside, her life had narrowed to 3 things. A golden dog fighting to heal, a man with a quiet storm behind his eyes, and the realization that money didn't just buy silence, it rented it. And Maya, for the first time in a long time, felt something rise under the fear, something stubborn, bright, and fierce as Sunny's coat in sunlight. By the time the call ended, Maya's studio felt smaller than it had any right to. The arched windows that usually made the space feel like a cathedral of light now looked like exposed skin. Beautiful, vulnerable, easy to bruise. Outside, Charleston moved on with its Friday night hum, distant laughter, a car stereo sliding past, the soft clack of heels on sidewalk. Inside, Maya sat very still in her wheelchair, phone on the table like it had teeth. Her cheek throbbed in slow pulses, and each pulse seemed to say the same thing in a different rhythm. They can reach you. She stared at the paint-stained rag by her sink, at the half-finished canvas leaning against the wall, at Sunny's folded service vest, like a promise currently on hold. Jack Mercer stood near the kitchenette, one shoulder against the counter, his body quiet, but his attention everywhere. He'd listened to the lawyer's threats without a flicker of surprise, the way people did when they'd seen intimidation before and knew exactly how it escalated. They're not going to stop, Maya said, voice thin. She hated the tremor in it. They'll go after my lease. They'll go after my reputation. They'll... Her throat tightened, and the rest of the sentence became a picture she couldn't speak. Sonny's ribs, Sonny's pain, Sonny's golden body under a shoe again. Jack's gaze softened just a fraction. Look at me, he said gently. Maya tried. She did. His eyes, gray, steady, didn't pity her. They assessed her like she was capable. You're not signing anything, he said, and you're not alone in this. Maya let out a short laugh that almost sounded like a sob. I've been alone in it for 3 years, she replied, meaning the accident, meaning the way people's empathy turned into impatience over time. People show up for the headline. They don't show up for the long part. Jack nodded once. Then we make the long part harder to ignore, he said. And it wasn't a dramatic vow. It was a plan forming. He stepped toward her work table, cleared a space with quick, tidy movements, and pulled a small notebook from his pocket. Waterproof paper, the kind you didn't buy at an office supply store. He wrote Langford Pritchard at the top, in block letters. Tell me everything, he said. Start with the car, then what he said, then what his friends did, then what you did. Maya blinked. Why? Because memory gets fuzzy when you're scared, Jack answered, and they're going to count on that. It was practical. It was protective. It made Maya's chest loosen a notch. She took a breath, then another, and began to speak. As she talked, the scene in Hampton Park stopped being only a nightmare replay and became a sequence with edges. The twig thrown at Sonny, the flask cap hitting his nose, Carter's hand in her hair, the slap. Jack wrote it down without interrupting, occasionally asking for a detail the way a good interviewer did, calm, precise. When she finished, Jack flipped the page and wrote, Evidence. Did anyone film? He asked. I saw a guy with a phone, Maya said, thinking hard. Near the fountain. He looked like he was pretending not to look. Jack nodded. We find him. The park has cameras? She asked, already knowing the answer would probably disappoint. Maybe, Jack said. But we don't rely on maybe. He capped his pen. We build a chain, witnesses, clinic records, police report number, call log from Pritchard, anything they touch. Maya stared at him. You sound like you've done this before. Jack's mouth tightened. Different context, he said. Same principle. People who use power count on silence. Silence is a resource. The word landed in Maya's gut. Resource. As if fear were a commodity. She looked away, blinking fast. Sonny's there alone, she murmured. He hates that. Jack's voice softened again. He's not alone, he said. He's with professionals, and he knows you're coming back. Maya wanted to believe him the way she used to believe Sunshine would always come back too. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Her whole body jolted, adrenaline surging as if the lawyer had returned. Jack's hand lifted, palm down, the universal sign for breathe. Maya swallowed and answered, voice cautious. Hello? Ms. Reed? A woman's voice asked. It was warm but direct, with a slight rasp like someone who talked for a living. My name is Lena Brooks. I'm an investigative reporter, podcast and print. Doctor. Klein gave me your number, only if you were okay with it. Maya's eyes snapped to Jack. His expression didn't change, but his attention sharpened. Dr. Klein did what? Maya asked, half stunned, half grateful that someone in this city had decided to use their conscience. Lena exhaled. He said you were threatened tonight, and that your service dog was hurt. I'm not calling to exploit you, Lena said quickly. I'm calling because I've been tracking Langford Development's pattern. Quiet pressure, leases mysteriously ending, complaints disappearing. What happened to you fits. Maya's throat went tight. I filed a report, she said. The officer acted like it was inconvenient. Yeah, Lena replied, a grim edge in her voice. That checks out. Maya stared at her ruined, calm reflection in the dark window. I don't know if I can be the face of anything, she admitted. I just wanted to draw in a park. Lena's voice softened. You don't have to be a face, she said. You can be a document, a pattern, a case that finally has teeth because your dog is evidence, and your bruise is evidence, and their lawyer's call is evidence. Maya flinched at the word dog is evidence. even though she knew Lena meant it strategically, not coldly. Jack held up 2 fingers. "Give me a minute," then mouthed, "Put it on speaker." Maya did. "Lena," Jack said, voice calm. "This is Jack Mercer. I'm with Maya." There was a pause. "Okay," Lena said carefully, as if tasting the name for context. "And who are you to her?" "A witness," Jack replied, "and a person who doesn't like bullies." Lena's breath hitched in something that might have been a laugh. "I don't like them either," she said. "Listen, Maya, don't answer any more unknown calls tonight. Screenshot everything, save voicemail. If they send a courier, don't open the door. Photograph anything dropped off." Maya's skin crawled. "You think they'd do that?" "They already did," Lena said flatly. "They just did it over the phone." Jack's eyes narrowed slightly, as if something clicked into place. "Do you have a way to keep her safe?" Lena asked. "Not police," she added immediately. "Not local." Jack looked around the studio again, seeing it now like a perimeter. "We'll handle tonight," he said. "Tomorrow we move smarter." Lena lowered her voice. "I can connect you with someone at the county level," she offered. "Not Langford friendly. Also, there's a veterans legal clinic that's been pushing back on some of this. If you're willing, I'll make introductions." Jack's jaw flexed. "Do it," he said. Maya's stomach fluttered with something like fear and something like hope. After Lena hung up, the studio's silence returned, but it felt different. Less like a trap, more like a room where strategy could be built. Jack crossed to the front door. He checked the deadbolts with deliberate pressure. "Your frame is old," he said. "If someone kicks it, it splinters." Maya's face drained. "So what? What do I do?" "I can't just—" "You don't," Jack cut in, not harshly, but with certainty. He opened his bag. No longer just a runner's waist kit. This was a small, nondescript backpack he'd brought from his rental car, and it held a tidy handful of items that made Maya's artist brain think of a different kind of craft. Gray tape, thin cord, a palm-sized alarm device, a tiny motion sensor. "This isn't a fortress," Jack said, noticing her stare. "It's a loud no for anyone who tries to creep." He taped the alarm beside the door with a strip of heavy-duty cloth tape. "We call it 100-mile-an-hour tape," he explained. "It stays put." He looped a thin cord from the alarm pin to the inside edge of the door. "If someone opens it more than an inch, the pin pulls. This thing screams." Maya swallowed. "Does it actually work?" Jack gave her a quick look that almost held humor. "It'll make your neighbors hate you," he said, "which is exactly what we want if someone's breaking in." He moved to the window latch. "These are pretty," he said, "and easy." He set another small sensor on the sill, angled toward the glass. Motion, it chirps first, then screams. Maya watched, part horrified and part comforted by the competence. She'd learned how to navigate accessibility, how to maneuver ramps and bathrooms and sidewalks. She had not learned how to turn a home into a warning system. Jack wasn't making her feel helpless. He was giving her tools. When he finished, he stepped back and looked around as if reading the room's new geometry. "Okay," he said. "Better." Maya's eyes burned. "I hate this," she confessed. "I hate that I have to do this just to exist." Jack's voice lowered. "Me too," he said. "But hating it doesn't mean we let it happen." He pulled out his phone and tapped a contact. "I'm making one call," he said. "Not to cops." He raised the phone to his ear. "Sam, it's Mercer." A man answered with a sleepy, amused tone. "Jack, you die or something?" "Not yet," Jack replied. "I need a favor. I'm in Charleston. Local families leaning on people." Assault, intimidation, service dog injured, lawyer threats. The humor evaporated on the other end. "Names?" "Langford," Jack said, "and their attorney, Malcolm Pritchard." A pause. "Oh," Sam said, the kind of "oh" that meant the name carried weight. "Yeah, I've heard it." Jack's voice stayed flat. "I need someone above local to advise." DA's office, state level, veterans legal clinic. Someone not bought. Sam exhaled. "I can loop you in with a friend at the solicitor's office," he said. "And the veterans clinic? There's a guy named Ben O'Hara, former JAG. He loves a corrupt little kingdom to knock down." Jack's eyes flicked briefly to Maya, as if to confirm she was hearing. You're not alone. Send me contacts, Jack said. Tonight. You got it, Sam replied. And Jack? Yeah. You okay? Jack's gaze shifted, briefly distant, as if his mind brushed something he didn't want to name. I'm fine, he said, and ended the call. Maya rolled closer to the table, fingers curling around the edge. You just do things, she said quietly, like you don't get stuck. Jack's mouth tightened. I get stuck, he admitted. I just don't do it where it gets people hurt. The honesty in that sentence made Maya's chest ache. She didn't press. Instead, she asked the practical question that sounded like a lifeline. Are you hungry? Jack blinked, surprised, then shrugged. I could eat. Maya let out a shaky breath. There's a Thai place that delivers, she said. It's cheap but good. Jack nodded once. Order. You need to eat too. The food arrived in paper bags that smelled like basil and garlic and warmth. They ate at Maya's work table, amid paintbrushes and charcoal smudges. Two strangers sharing noodles like it was the most normal thing in the world. Maya realized her hands had stopped shaking while she chewed. Normality didn't fix terror, but it put a hand on its shoulder and told it to sit down for a second. Between bites, Maya's gaze drifted to Sonny's vest. He's going to be confused, she murmured, waking up, and I'm not there. Jack's voice was quiet. He'll be sore, he said, but he'll forgive fast. Dogs live in the present better than we do. And Maya's eyes stung. He saved me, she said, and I couldn't save him. Jack put his fork down, tone firm. You don't measure love by whether you can throw punches, he said. You saved him by getting him help. You're saving him right now by not letting them silence you. Maya swallowed hard. Outside, the city's noise softened. Somewhere down the street, a car door slammed. Maya flinched and Jack's head turned immediately toward the sound, eyes narrowing. He didn't jump. He simply listened until the moment passed, then looked back at her. Tonight, you sleep, he said. You lock up. You don't answer unknown calls. If you need something, you call me. Maya stared at him, searching for the catch. There wasn't one, only a steady decision. Where will you go? She asked. Jack's voice was simple. I'll be close, he said. Close enough. Maya nodded, throat too tight for more. After Jack left, after he double-checked her locks and tested the alarm cord once so she could hear the warning chirp, Maya sat alone in the quiet and let herself breathe. She wheeled to the window and watched the streetlight glow on wet pavement. Her cheek still hurt. Sonny was still at the clinic. The Langfords were still out there, and money still moved like water through Charleston's cracks. But, for the first time since Hampton Park, Maya didn't feel like she was floating without a rope. She had documentation. She had names. She had a reporter. She had a contact chain that didn't lead back to Officer Rusk's shrug. And she had the image of Sonny's weak tail thump, the stubborn insistence in his eyes. The next morning, she told herself, she would do something ordinary. She would go out for coffee and groceries like a person allowed to live. She didn't know yet that ordinary was exactly where bullies like to strike. Morning came to Charleston the way it always did. Soft light, wet air, the city pretending nothing happened overnight. The live oaks along the street outside Maya's building dripped with humidity, and somewhere down the block, a delivery truck hissed to a stop. The world kept its rhythm. That was the cruelest part. Maya sat at her work table with a mug of coffee she barely tasted, staring at Sonny's folded vest like it might unfold itself and walk back into her life. She had slept in short, broken pieces, waking at every distant sound. A car door, a laugh, a dog barking 3 streets away. Each time, she'd turned her head toward the alarm Jack had taped beside the door, as if the small plastic device could stand between her and a family name, powerful enough to rewrite reality. Jack had checked in by text before sunrise. 2 messages. Simple, steady. You awake? Remember, don't answer unknown calls. Maya had replied with a single word, yes. She wanted to say more. She wanted to admit that the worst part wasn't fear for herself. It was the empty space on the floor where Sonny normally lay, warm and solid, a golden anchor. At 9:30, Dr. Klein called. Sonny had a good night, he said. Pain controlled, no signs of internal bleeding. If things stay stable, you can pick him up after lunch. Maya's throat tightened with relief so sharp it almost hurt. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." When she hung up, she sat very still, letting the idea of Sonny coming home settle into her bones. Not today, she told herself. Not today will she be the woman who flinches at her own front door forever. She would go out, buy groceries, come back, pick Sonny up, and keep living. Because if she stopped living, they'd already won. She packed a small tote, snacks, her wallet, her phone charger, the pepper spray she'd never liked carrying but had bought after the accident. A folded list Lena had texted her, things to document, people to call. She checked her locks twice, then looked at the thin wire Jack had rigged to the alarm pin. Taut, ready. She exhaled slowly. Just 20 minutes, she murmured to herself. 2 blocks, in and out. On the sidewalk, Charleston's humidity wrapped around her like a damp sweater. The city smelled like brick dust, river air, and the faint sweetness of magnolias. Maya rolled toward the small grocery on the corner, hands steady on the rims, forcing her mind to stay in the present. She even allowed herself to notice something beautiful, sunlight catching in a puddle, making it look like melted gold, a tiny, hopeful thing. Half a block behind her, a black SUV sat at the curb with its engine off, windows tinted too dark for a civilian car in daylight. Maya didn't see it. She was focused on curb cuts and crosswalk timing, on the practical geometry of living in a world built mostly for legs. Inside the SUV, Carter Langford III watched her through the windshield and felt the sick heat of humiliation still crawling under his skin from yesterday. The memory of Jack Mercer's flat gray eyes had turned his stomach all night. Carter wasn't used to fear. Fear was something for other people, people with smaller names. But fear had fermented into rage by morning, and rage needed an outlet. Beside him in the back seat, Mason Hargrove rolled his shoulder like it still remembered the choke that had dropped him to the grass. "We shouldn't," Mason muttered. "That guy—" "He's gone," Carter snapped, voice sharp. "He's on leave. He's a tourist with muscles. That's it." Tyler Quinn sat in the passenger seat, pale, bouncing his knee. "I don't like this," he said quietly. Your dad's gonna do what my dad tells him to," Carter cut in. He pulled out his phone and glanced at the single message from Malcolm Pritchard. Service entrance. Master access. Move fast. No faces, no cameras. And beneath that, reminder. Dog still at clinic. Carter's mouth curled. The dog. The stupid golden dog had made him look weak. The girl's scream had made strangers stare. Carter needed a reset. A new story where he was in control. "We're not touching her," Carter said, voice low now, almost excited. "Not today. We're teaching her something else." He nodded toward the alley beside Maya's building. "Move." The service alley behind the building was narrow and shadowed, smelling faintly of old cardboard and hot asphalt. There was a steel door set into brick, unmarked, forgettable. The kind of door that existed so the city could hide what it didn't want to see. Trash, deliveries, maintenance, the skeleton of a place. Carter slid a keycard through a small reader. A quiet beep. The lock clicked open. Tyler swallowed hard. "How do you have that?" he whispered. Carter's smile was thin. "People give you things when you're a Langford," he said. "That's the lesson." They moved into the dim hallway beyond, footsteps echoing softly. The building's interior smelled like old wood and detergent. Carter climbed the back stairs, heart pounding with a thrill that felt like a drug. He wasn't thinking about consequences. He was thinking about power. On the first floor landing, there was a plain door with a simple handle. The secondary entrance Maya had never used except when movers brought in canvases. The landlord had probably told her it existed as a convenience. Carter saw it as a weakness. "This one," he whispered. Tyler's hand shook as he slid a credit card against the latch. It popped open with a soft click. No alarm, no scream. Carter's grin widened. "See?" he breathed. "Your soldier boy isn't magic." They stepped into Maya's studio. Sunlight poured in through the arched windows, catching dust motes that floated like tiny pale stars. For a heartbeat, the room's beauty made Tyler hesitate. The canvases leaned against the wall like quiet witnesses. The smell of paint and turpentine hung in the air, comforting and sharp. It was clearly someone's life. Mason exhaled, almost impressed. "She's good," he murmured, eyes landing on a large canvas of Hampton Park's fountain, moss and water, rendered with a haunting softness. "So?" Carter snapped, the old anger rising. "So, she thinks that makes her better than us." He strode toward the fountain painting and punched his fist straight through the center. The canvas tore with a loud, sickening rip. Tyler flinched. Mason stared. Carter pulled his hand back, paint dust and fibers clinging to his knuckles like evidence, and laughed, a short, ugly sound that released his tension like steam. "Come on," he said, voice gaining momentum. "Let's redecorate." Something in Tyler snapped, not into courage, but into compliance. He grabbed a jar of ultramarine pigment from a shelf and hurled it at the wall. It exploded in a starburst of blue, dripping down like bruised rain. Mason, caught up in the momentum, seized a wooden easel and slammed it against the floor until one leg splintered off. The sound of breaking wood filled the studio, loud and final. Carter moved from painting to painting with the cold precision of a vandal who understood exactly what he was destroying. He didn't just knock things over, he ruined them. A portrait of an elderly Gula woman, serene, powerful, was slashed down the center with Maya's own box cutter. A salt marsh sunrise, all soft pinks and golds, was ripped free of its stretcher bars and crumpled like trash. Carter enjoyed the sound of it, tearing fabric, shattering glass, the wet splatter of paint. It was violence without bruises, designed to leave the kind of wound that didn't show on skin, but bled for months. 3 minutes. That was all it took. The studio became a battlefield of shredded canvas, overturned stools, broken frames, and puddles of mixed pigment that stank like chemicals and loss. Tyler stood panting, eyes wide, looking around as if waking from a trance. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, we should go." "One more thing," Carter said. He reached into his bag and pulled out a can of red spray paint. The rattle inside the can sounded like a threat in miniature. He walked to the one clean wall, the white space Maya used to project sketches and plan compositions. Carter shook the can, then began to write in thick, dripping strokes. The words were large, angry, impossible to miss. "Next time, it's the dog." Mason's mouth fell open. "Dude!" he breathed. That's the point," Carter snapped. "She loves the dog. She'll shut up." Tyler's face turned gray. We did," Carter cut in, voice hard. He capped the paint with a final click. "We're done." They left as quickly as they came, slipping back through the service door and into the SUV like shadows. The building settled into silence again, unaware it had just been violated. Maya returned 15 minutes later with a bag of groceries balanced on her lap. She was thinking about Sonny. She was thinking about the way he would look at her when she came into the clinic. Hurt, maybe, but still trusting. She rolled up to her front door and saw the thin alarm wire still taut, still perfect. Relief flickered, safe. She unlocked the deadbolts one by one, the metallic clicks sounding like tiny victories, and pushed inside. The smell hit her first. Not oil paint, not turpentine, aerosol. Sharp, chemical, wrong. Her stomach dropped. She rolled farther in, eyes lifting. Her studio, her refuge, was gone. It was a war zone. Canvases lay ripped and crumpled across the floor, like bodies after a storm. Easels were shattered. Jars of pigment had been smashed, spilling thick, toxic puddles of color that smeared across the hardwood. The place looked like someone had taken her life and shaken it until it broke apart. Maya's breath left her in a single silent exhale. She couldn't scream. She couldn't move. The world narrowed to the sound of her own pulse and the sickening drip of paint sliding down the wall. Then she saw it. The white wall, her clean space, now branded in red letters so big they seemed to shout. "Next time, it's the dog." Her hands went numb. The groceries slipped off her lap one by one, rolling across the floor like offerings to an altar of cruelty. A jar of coffee shattered, dark liquid spreading into the bright mess. Maya's throat opened for a sound that never came. It wasn't fear that stopped her. It was something worse, a hollowing out. She sat there in the wreckage, a silent statue, staring at the message like it was carved into her bones. Her mind tried to argue with it, to find logic. Sonny was at the clinic. Sunny was safe. But the threat wasn't about today. It was about forever, about making her decisions for her, about making her trade her voice for her dog's life. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time didn't behave normally in that kind of shock. Somewhere far away her phone buzzed. She didn't react. It buzzed again. Again. Finally, muscle memory made her glance down. Jack Mercer. She didn't press accept at first. Her finger hovered, trembling. Then she hit answer and put the phone to her ear. The first sound she made was not a greeting. It was a breath that broke in the middle. "Jack!" she whispered. It barely carried. "Maya?" His voice was instantly alert, the sharp edge of a man who heard something wrong in the smallest shift. "Talk to me." Maya stared at the wall. Her voice came out flat, deadened by disbelief. "They were here," she said. My studio. It's destroyed." Silence on the other end, the kind that wasn't absence, but a decision. "Are you hurt?" Jack asked, each word precise. "No," Maya whispered. "But they wrote, Jack, they wrote." Her throat closed. She couldn't say it. Jack's voice hardened. "Read it." Maya swallowed, tasting aerosol in her mouth. "Next time, it's the dog," she whispered, and the words felt like acid. Jack didn't curse. He didn't gasp. He simply said, "Stay there." His voice dropped into that calm, flat register Maya had heard in the park right before everything shifted. "Do not touch anything. Do not clean. Do not call Officer Rusk. Do you hear me?" Maya's hands shook on her wheels. "I hear you." "I'm coming," Jack said. "And Maya?" "Yeah, you did not lose," he said, voice low and steady. "They just told us exactly what they plan to do next." The line clicked off. Maya sat in the wreckage and tried to breathe like Sunny had trained her. Slow in, slow out, count the seconds. She couldn't stop staring at the red letters. She couldn't stop thinking about a golden body in pain. Outside, Charleston's morning sun kept shining, indifferent and bright. Inside, something in Maya shifted. The fear was still there, huge, heavy. But under it, anger began to move, slow and molten, like a tide preparing to rise. And when Jack walked through that door, she knew the story would stop being just hers. Night in Charleston had a way of pretending it was gentle. The air cooled only slightly, still damp, still heavy, the streets shining under lamplight as if the city had been polished to hide its bruises. Maya sat in a beige motel room, 12 miles off I-26. Anonymous, forgettable. The kind of place you passed on the highway without ever noticing. The curtains were drawn tight. The TV was off. A single lamp cast a small circle of light over the bedspread. And within that circle, Sunny slept. He was curled on his side, bandage wrapped snug around his torso, fur flattened where the vet techs had shaved a strip for an IV. Even asleep, his paws twitched sometimes, as if he still believed he was standing guard. His breathing was shallow but steady. Each inhale looked like it asked permission of his broken ribs. Maya watched him with her hands clenched in her lap, exhausted in every cell. She had showered, but the smell of aerosol paint still clung to the back of her throat like a curse. Jack Mercer moved through the room like a man who couldn't afford to waste motion. He had paid cash at the front desk under a different name. He'd checked the locks, the window latch, the hallway sightline, and the parking lot for cars that didn't belong. Then he'd sat on the edge of the second bed and said, very simply, "They escalated. Now we change the terms." Maya had looked up at him, face hollow, and whispered, "What terms?" Jack's eyes had been flat, not cruel, just focused. "They want you afraid enough to disappear," he said, "so we make them visible." The plan came in pieces, assembled without drama. First, they documented the studio. Jack had returned with Maya earlier that afternoon, stepping through her destroyed sanctuary with a calm that felt unnatural only because Maya was still shattered. He'd filmed everything with slow, deliberate sweeps, ripped canvases, shattered easels, destroyed pigments, the red message dripping down the white wall. He'd photographed the latch marks on the secondary door and the faint scuff prints in the hallway dust. He'd found a smear of red paint on the doorknob and, with a small evidence swab from his kit, sealed it in a labeled bag. Maya had watched, stunned, as if witnessing someone rebuild her world out of procedure. Second, he'd moved her, because the studio was no longer a home, it was a trap. Third, and most important, he'd refused to treat the threat as a metaphor. Next time it's the dog wasn't a sentence Carter wrote for intimidation. It was a promise of action. Jack intended to intercept that action. "I don't want to use Sonny as bait," Maya had whispered in the motel room, voice cracking. Jack had crouched beside her, lowering his intensity so she could breathe. "We're not," he said. "Sonny won't be harmed. He'll be the reason they get caught." Maya looked at Sonny's sleeping body and felt sick with fear. She wanted to believe Jack's certainty. She also knew bullies didn't play fair. But the alternative, running forever, felt like a slow death. "Okay," she had said finally, the word tasting like iron. Now, near midnight, Maya listened to the motel's faint noises. A door closing somewhere down the hall, footsteps, a cough, and tried not to jump at each sound. Jack sat in the plastic chair by the window, silhouette still against the curtain dark. His phone lay on the nightstand, screen lit with a map and 2 pinned points, Maya's studio and the emergency vet clinic. "How do you know they'll come?" Maya asked quietly. Jack didn't look away from the window. "Because people like Carter don't stop when they win," he said. "They stop when the risk outweighs the pleasure." Maya's voice tightened. "They already got pleasure." "Not enough," Jack replied. "He wants the last word. He wants you to beg." Sonny stirred, letting out a small grunt of discomfort. Maya's heart clenched. She reached down and slowly stroked his neck until he settled again. His fur was warm under her fingers, a living reminder of what was at stake. The burner phone on Jack's lap vibrated softly. He glanced at the screen. No contact name, just a number. He answered without greeting. "Yeah." A man's voice came through, low and urgent. "Mercer." "It's Sam. You were right to be careful. My buddy at the solicitor's office says something's moving. They're hearing chatter about Langford's attorney cleaning up loose ends. Also, someone called in a weird inquiry about Sonny's final vet bill." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Who?" "A law firm," Sam said. "Pritchard and Hale." Maya's stomach dropped. Jack's jaw tightened. That was it. Confirmation. The vet bill wasn't a kindness, it was bait. It was a way to track, to manipulate, to feed Carter information. Jack exhaled once, slow. "Thanks," he said. "Text me the contact. Keep your friend on standby." He ended the call and looked at Maya. "They're moving tonight," he said. Maya's hands went cold. "At the clinic? They think Sonny's there," Jack replied. "But we pulled him out, which means they'll choose a different target. Your studio. They already know how to get in. They'll go back for the dog, and when they don't find him, they'll either escalate again or try to grab him from somewhere else." He stood, reaching for his bag. "We go now." Maya's throat tightened. "Back there?" Jack nodded. "Not you," he said quickly. "You stay here with Sonny, door locked. Do not open it for anyone." Maya's eyes widened. "No, I'm not letting you go alone." Jack's gaze held hers, steady and unyielding. "Maya," he said, voice low. "If you go, you're a target. If you stay, you're safe. And Sonny stays safe." The way he said safe made it sound like a promise he'd already decided to keep, even if it cost him. Maya hated how much she wanted to obey. She also hated how much she trusted him now. She swallowed. "Call me," she whispered. "The moment anything." "I will," Jack said. He leaned down and gave Sonny a gentle pat on the shoulder. Sonny's eyes fluttered half open. He recognized Jack, and his tail gave a weak thump. Even injured, he approved of this man. Jack straightened and left, quiet as a shadow. Maya sat frozen in the lamp's circle, listening to the motel's silence swallow his footsteps. Back at the studio, the air was different at night. The building's old bones creaked softly, and the streetlight glow through the arched windows made the wreckage look like a crime scene in a museum. Beautiful in the wrong way. Jack stood in the alley beside the service door, hoodie pulled up, hands in gloves. He wasn't here to play vigilante. He was here to force the truth into the open where money couldn't bury it. He slipped inside through the compromised service entrance without making a sound and moved through the dim hallway to Maya's secondary studio door. The latch still bore the faint scratches from yesterday's credit card trick. Jack didn't fix it. He didn't want it fixed. He wanted it used. Inside, He moved with careful familiarity. He killed the breaker for the studio lights, plunging the room into absolute darkness. Then he arranged the space the way a hunter arranged a blind, leaving the destroyed canvases where they were, positioning overturned furniture to create narrow paths, setting a small battery camera low to catch faces and hands. He placed a tiny motion sensor near the secondary door, its receiver in his pocket. The alarm wouldn't scream. This one would whisper to him. He checked the bathroom door where Sonny had once been able to hide. Empty now, but Jack left it slightly ajar. An illusion of presence. Then he sat down in the deepest shadowed corner and waited. Time slowed. He listened to the building's breathing. Pipes, distant traffic, a dog barking somewhere. His mind didn't wander to war. He didn't let it. He stayed in this room, in this city, with this golden dog's life hanging like a thread in the dark. The first sound came at 1:17 a.m. A faint electronic beep at the service door, followed by the soft scrape of it opening. Jack's motion sensor receiver pulsed once. Company. He heard muffled voices in the hallway. "Told you!" Carter's voice whispered, tight with excitement. "He's here. The dog's here. Harrison said the dog was at the clinic," Mason muttered, nervous. "We already went there. We looked like idiots." "Because you're an idiot," Carter hissed. He moved the dog. "Fine. We find it here." Tyler's voice was thin. "What if the SEAL guy—" "He's gone," Carter snapped. "He can't do anything. He doesn't want trouble. He's on leave. Now shut up." The secondary door clicked softly as a credit card slid in. The latch popped. The door opened, and the three men stepped into darkness. Their phones' flashlights snapped on almost immediately. 3 bright beams jittering across wreckage. In that instant, Jack knew he'd been right. They weren't here to apologize, to negotiate, to end it. They were here to hunt. "Spread out," Carter whispered. "Bathroom first." He moved toward the bathroom door, his beam fixed on it like a weapon. Mason's light swept the ruined canvases. Tyler's beam trembled as it searched corners. Their lights ruined their night vision and made them obvious, but it also made Jack's work cleaner. He didn't move until Tyler stepped too close to the kitchenette area. Tyler's beam flicked past the shadowed corner where Jack sat, missing him by inches. Tyler exhaled shakily. "This place is creepy, man." Jack moved. He rose without sound and stepped into Tyler's path. Tyler's flashlight swung up, catching Jack's face for half a second. Tyler's mouth opened in a startled gasp that never became a scream. Jack's hand chopped down to the side of Tyler's neck, precise, controlled. Tyler's body went slack and folded to the floor. His phone clattered and spun, flashlight beams slicing across the ceiling. Jack caught the phone, turned the light off, and dragged Tyler behind a toppled shelf. A zip tie cinched around Tyler's wrists. One down. Mason saw movement and turned. "Tyler!" he called, voice thick with fear. His beam swept the studio wildly. Jack didn't answer. He made a small noise instead, a deliberate scuff to the left. Mason's light snapped toward it. Jack came from the right. He grabbed Mason's wrist, twisted, and drove Mason face first into the floor with controlled force. Mason grunted, air leaving him in a woof. Jack's knee pinned his shoulder blades. "Don't!" Mason wheezed, panic cracking his voice. Zip tie. 2 down. Carter froze in the center of the room, flashlight beam flailing. "Mason!" he hissed. "Stop playing!" No one answered. The only sound was Carter's own breathing. Quick, shallow, the breath of a boy who had never been truly hunted before. Carter's beam landed on the red message on the wall, and for a second Jack saw something flicker in him. Pride at his cruelty. Carter turned toward the bathroom. "Dog," he whispered, voice feral. He reached for the knob. He was completely exposed, his back to the room. Jack let him believe, let him commit. Then Jack flipped the breaker back on. The studio flooded with harsh white light. Carter cried out, blinded, stumbling backward. When his eyes adjusted, he saw it. Mason and Tyler bound on the floor, gagged with strips of canvas, fear wide in their eyes. And in the wooden desk chair in the center of the room sat Jack Mercer, calm, legs apart, elbows on his knees, holding a zip tie in his hands like a casual loop of rope. Carter's face drained of color. "You," Carter stammered. "You were—" Jack stood slowly. You broke into a disabled woman's home, Jack said, voice flat. You destroyed her work. You threatened her service dog, and now you broke in again. Carter's hands shook around his phone. This is a trap, he snarled, trying to find rage to cover fear. My father, my lawyer. Your lawyer set you up, Jack said, the truth landing like a punch. You just don't know it yet. Carter's eyes darted wildly, searching for an exit, for a weapon, for anything that made him feel like himself again. He spotted a broken easel leg and snatched it up like a club. Stay back, he shrieked. I'll kill you. Jack didn't flinch. Drop it, he said, voice low. Carter screamed and swung. The swing was sloppy, fueled by panic. Jack stepped into it, deflecting with one forearm and seizing Carter's wrist with the other. He twisted. A wet snap echoed in the studio. Carter's scream ripped through the air, high and animal. The makeshift club fell. Carter collapsed, clutching his wrist, sobbing and cursing. Jack moved without triumph. He zip-tied Carter's good hand to his ankle, immobilizing him. Then he opened his kit and did something that made the scene unarguable. He took out a sterile blade and made a controlled cut on his own forearm. Deep enough to bleed, shallow enough to be safe. Blood dripped onto the floor in a clean line. He wrapped it quickly with gauze, then picked up Carter's phone from where it had fallen. He dialed 911 and put the call on speaker. My name is Jack Mercer, he said, voice strained just enough to sound real. I'm at 142 West Rutledge Avenue, Unit B. 3 men broke in. They attacked me. I managed to restrain them. I'm bleeding. Please send police and an ambulance. Carter tried to protest, sobbing. He attacked us. But his words were muffled by pain and panic, and it sounded like exactly what it was. A rich kid caught doing something unforgivable. Sirens arrived fast. The first officers through the secondary door weren't Officer Rusk. Jack had been careful about that, too. The responding unit was led by Sergeant Maris Caldwell, a detective with a sharp, no-nonsense presence and eyes that moved like scalpels. She took in the scene in one sweep. Bound men, destroyed studio, red thread on the wall, Jack's bleeding arm. Then she looked at Carter, expensive shirt smeared with grime, face twisted in terror and entitlement. What happened? Caldwell demanded. Carter tried. He ambushed us. He's lying. Call my attorney? Caldwell held up a hand, shutting him down. Her gaze shifted to the doorframe and the latch marks, the kind of details Officer Rusk had ignored. She spotted the keycard on the floor near Carter's shoe. She picked it up with a gloved hand, her eyes narrowed. You used a keycard to access a service entrance, she said, voice cold. So, you weren't invited. Jack's voice was calm, controlled. This is the second time they've entered, he said. Yesterday they destroyed the studio and left that message. Today they came back looking for the dog. Caldwell's eyes flicked to the bathroom door. Is the dog here? Not tonight, Jack said. Safe location. That was enough. Caldwell's jaw clenched. Good. She turned back to Carter. You are under arrest for breaking and entering, criminal mischief, and aggravated assault. Carter's face contorted. You can't... Do you know who I am? Caldwell's expression didn't change. I know what you did, she said, and I know who pays my salary. The handcuffs clicked shut like a final sentence. As the officers lifted Mason and Tyler to their feet, Caldwell glanced again at the red message on the wall. Her eyes hardened in something that looked like disgust. She looked back at Jack. You military? She asked. Jack nodded, offering his ID. She read it quickly, then returned it. You did the right thing calling, she said quietly, the smallest crack of respect in her voice. Stay available. I'm going to want a formal statement, and I'm going to want to know why your report didn't get traction yesterday. Jack's gaze held hers. So do I, he said. Dawn stained the sky a pale gray by the time Jack returned to the motel. He let himself in with a soft click. Maya was awake, sitting upright, eyes hollow with sleepless fear. Sonny lay at her feet, head lifted slightly, ears relaxed. The moment he saw Jack, Sonny's tail thumped, weak but happy, against the carpet. Maya's breath hitched. It's over, Jack said, voice low. His arm was bandaged cleanly. They're in custody, caught in the act. Maya stared at the bandage, then at his face. You're hurt. Scratch, Jack said, dismissive, but his eyes softened. Not enough to matter. Maya's throat tightened. She rolled closer, hand trembling. She didn't touch the bandage. She placed her palm over his hand instead. Warm skin on calloused skin. Jack turned his hand and laced his fingers with hers, grounding her as if he'd been doing it for years. Sonny, sensing the shift, let out a soft sigh and rested his chin on Maya's footplate. The room was quiet. Outside, traffic began to growl, the city waking up again. Inside, something settled, not victory, not revenge, something cleaner. Truth made visible. "What happens now?" Maya whispered. Jack looked at Sonny, then at her. "Now," he said, "we let the light do what it does." By the time the sun rose, Charleston looked like it always did in postcards. Pale gold light on brick, Spanish moss hanging like lace, the harbor air smelling faintly of salt and diesel. The city's beauty felt almost offensive after the last 48 hours, like a perfect painting hung over a cracked wall. Maya watched the morning through the motel's thin curtains while Sonny dozed at her feet. He was awake more often now, eyes tracking her as if checking she hadn't vanished again. When she shifted in her wheelchair, he shifted too, careful not to jostle his ribs, but determined to stay near. Every time his tail thumped, weak, slow, it felt like an oath. "I'm still here." Jack sat at the small plastic table with 2 coffees and a paper bag of breakfast he hadn't touched. His bandaged forearm rested on the tabletop. It looked clean, professional, controlled. Maya knew he'd made that cut on purpose, a calculated choice that turned their situation from a private terror into a public case. She didn't know how to feel about it. Gratitude, fear, guilt, relief. So she held all of it at once, letting the weight settle until it stopped shaking her. His phone rang at 8:12 a.m. Jack glanced at the screen and answered immediately. "Mercer." The voice on the other end was brisk, female, and all business. "Mr. Mercer, this is Sergeant Caldwell. I'm sure you're awake." Jack's gaze flicked to Maya, a small nod. "Stay steady." "I'm awake," he said. "Talk to me." "We processed the scene," Caldwell replied. "We have the key card. We have the forced entry marks. We have your 911 call. We also pulled security footage from the hallway camera outside the service stairwell. 3 suspects entered at 1:16 a.m., clear faces, clear timeline." Maya's chest loosened, as if a fist she hadn't known was there finally unclenched. "Good," Jack said. "What are the charges holding?" "4 now," Caldwell said. "Breaking and entering, criminal mischief, harassment, and aggravated assault. The solicitor is reviewing enhancement because of the service dog threats and the previous incident in the park." Jack's jaw flexed. "The park report was filed with Officer Rusk," he said evenly. "It went nowhere." There was a pause. "I know," Caldwell replied, voice colder now. "And I'm not pleased." Her tone shifted, the tiniest crack of human anger. One of the suspects, Carter Langford III, requested counsel immediately. Guess who showed up within the hour? Jack didn't have to guess. "Pritchard. Malcolm Pritchard," Caldwell confirmed. "He tried to bully the desk clerk into limiting access to the case file. He failed." Maya felt something sharp and bright flare in her chest, the first taste of a world where power didn't automatically win. "I want a formal statement from Ms. Reed today," Caldwell continued, "and I want veterinary records for Sonny. Threats against a service animal carry weight. I also want any proof of the intimidation call." Maya swallowed. The thought of sitting in a station again, of facing uniforms and fluorescent lights and the possibility of being dismissed made her stomach roll. But she looked down at Sonny and saw his eyes open, watching her. If she stayed silent now, that red message on her wall would keep speaking for her forever. "I'll come," Maya heard herself say. Jack turned his head, eyes steady. "We'll be there," he told Caldwell. "Send the time." When he hung up, Maya exhaled slowly. "I'm scared," she admitted. Jack didn't lie to soften it. "I know," he said. "But this time, you're walking into a room that already has evidence." Sonny let out a soft huff, as if he agreed. At the station, Sergeant Caldwell met them at the door instead of letting them wander into the lobby. She was in her late 30s, hair pulled into a tight bun, a plain blouse under her vest, eyes sharp enough to make people tell the truth without realizing it. She crouched immediately when she saw Sonny, keeping her voice low. "Hey, partner," she said, and Sonny's tail thumped once. Caldwell's gaze flicked to Maya. "Ms. Reed, I'm sorry for what happened to you, and I'm sorry you weren't taken seriously." Maya's throat tightened. That apology, simple, direct, hit harder than any dramatic speech. She nodded once, afraid if she spoke, she'd cry. Caldwell led them to a small interview room with a window and a recorder on the table. She didn't sit behind a barrier. She sat adjacent, angled like someone who wanted collaboration, not domination. "Tell me what happened in the park," she said. Maya spoke. At first her voice shook, then it steadied. She described Carter's cruelty, the way they held her chair, the slap, the kicks, the humiliation. She described Jack's arrival, not as a superhero, but as a witness who ended violence before it became fatal. She described Sonny's injuries and the vet's diagnosis. Caldwell listened without interrupting, occasionally asking for clarifying details, always in a tone that made Maya feel like she was building a case, not begging for belief. When Maya finished, Caldwell slid a printed sheet across the table. "Is this Malcolm Pritchard's number?" she asked. Maya glanced down. It was, she nodded. Jack handed over his phone with the call log and a saved recording. Maya's phone had auto-saved the last 30 seconds of the threat voicemail when she'd been too shaken to answer the second time. The lawyer's voice came through the tiny speaker, smooth, measured, promising lawsuits and eviction like weather. Caldwell's eyes hardened. "Good," she said quietly. "That's interference. That's intimidation." Outside the interview room, someone raised their voice in the hallway. Maya stiffened instinctively. Jack's hand rested lightly on the edge of her chair, not gripping, not controlling, just there, an anchor. Caldwell stood, opened the door, and her voice, calm, lethal, cut through the noise. "Not in my hallway." The shouting stopped. When Caldwell returned, her expression was controlled, but her eyes held a thin, bright fury. "Pritchard is trying to force a bond hearing today," she said. "He wants them out before anything spreads." Maya's stomach tightened. "Can he?" Caldwell leaned on the table, gaze locked with Maya's. "Not if we do this right," she said. "Which is why I want you to meet someone." She motioned to the door. A woman stepped in. Late 40s, sharp suit, hair cut in a clean bob, eyes tired in the way of someone who carried a lot of cases and still cared. "Ms. Reed," she said, offering her hand. "I'm Assistant Solicitor Dana Whitaker." Maya's heart pounded, state level, not bought, not afraid. Dana Whitaker sat down and looked at Sonny first, then at Maya. "I've reviewed the preliminary file," Dana said. "The break-in, the vandalism, the threat to your service animal, the intimidation call. This is not a boys will be boys situation. This is a pattern." Maya's fingers curled around her own hand, grounding herself. "They think they can rewrite what happened," she whispered. Dana nodded. "They've done it before," she said. "That's why they were so confident." She slid a folder across the table. Sergeant Caldwell pulled previous complaints tied to Langford development, leases terminated after disputes, code violations selectively enforced, harassment claims quietly closed. Individually, they look like unfortunate misunderstandings. And together, they look like influence. Jack's eyes narrowed. "Rico?" he asked, careful. Dana's mouth tightened. "Not yet," she said honestly. "But we are looking at conspiracy and witness intimidation. And if we find coordination through Pritchard and property owners, the scope widens." Maya's throat went dry. This wasn't just her. This was a whole city's quiet bruises, stacked on top of each other until they became undeniable. Dana leaned forward slightly. "I want to be clear," she said. "You will not be pressured into signing an NDA. You will not be evicted for telling the truth without us contesting it aggressively. And those men will not be released today without conditions that protect you and your dog." Maya felt tears rise. She blinked them back, not wanting to look weak in front of a prosecutor. Then Sonny nudged her knee gently, the way he always did when her breathing changed. She let one tear fall anyway, because it wasn't weakness, it was relief. After the meeting, Caldwell escorted them out a side door. News vans were already beginning to gather near the front steps, cameras pointed like curious birds. Maya froze at the sight. How? She started. Jack's phone buzzed with a message from Lena Brooks. You're not invisible anymore. I'm outside. If you want, we can control the narrative before they do. Maya's stomach lurched. She hated being seen. She also understood what Jack had said. Silence was a resource. If she didn't spend it, they would. Jack showed her the message. Your call, he said. Maya looked down at Sonny. He looked up at her, eyes calm, trusting. She remembered the red letters on her wall, the way they tried to make her decisions for her. She lifted her chin. We talk, she said, but on my terms. Lena met them near a tree-lined corner away from the main cameras. She was smaller than Maya had imagined, but her presence was sharp. Dark curls pinned back, notebook in hand, eyes that missed nothing. She didn't shove a mic in Maya's face. She asked softly, Are you safe right now? Maya swallowed. Safer, she said. Lena nodded. Then we do this carefully, she replied. She looked at Sonny and her expression softened. Hey, hero, she murmured. Sonny's tail thumped once. Lena's gaze returned to Maya. Tell me what you want people to know, she said. Maya took a breath. The air felt too big. The city felt too loud. But behind her, fear was something steady now. The sound of evidence being filed, the click of handcuffs, the calm weight of Sonny's head against her knee. I want them to know, Maya said, voice trembling but clear, that money doesn't get to decide who's human. She paused, then added, eyes on the camera Lena held low and respectful. And that my dog is not collateral. Jack stood just out of frame, arms folded, watchful. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The city had finally begun to listen, and Maya, quiet artist, wheelchair user, service dog handler, had become the voice it could no longer ignore. Sonny rested against her, breathing carefully, golden fur bright even under gray winter light. For the first time since the park, Maya felt the shape of the future shift, still uncertain, still hard, but no longer sealed shut by fear. Winter arrived properly the week after the hearing, as if Charleston had been waiting to exhale. The air sharpened, the humidity finally giving up its grip, and the city's old bricks held the cold like memory. Maya sat by the motel window with Sonny pressed against her shin, his golden body warm where he leaned, his bandage finally off, his movement careful but no longer painful. When he breathed, he didn't wince. When he stood, he didn't stagger. He was healing, slow, stubborn, steady, like her. The first real victory had not come with a triumphant headline or a dramatic courtroom speech. It came in a small sealed envelope slid under the motel door, a temporary protective order, crisp and official, issued within 48 hours of Dana Whitaker filing for it. Carter Langford III was barred from contacting Maya, approaching her home, or coming within a set distance of her or Sonny. Mason and Tyler were barred too. The words were plain and unemotional, but they wrapped around Maya like a coat. For the first time, the law felt like a shield instead of a wall. When Jack read the order, he exhaled once, slow, as if a knot in his chest loosened. Good, he said, and that single word held everything he didn't say about risk and vigilance and how close the night at the studio could have come to something worse. Dr. Klein cleared Sonny to resume light service work within 2 weeks. Short outings, he instructed gently, scratching behind Sonny's ear. No long pavement runs yet, and keep him away from crowds until he's fully confident again. Sonny, as if he understood, leaned into the scratch and then looked back at Maya, eyes bright. He wanted his vest back. He wanted his job. He wanted the world to be normal again. Maya didn't know if normal was possible, but she knew she wanted something else more, a life that belonged to her. Lena Brooks' story dropped on a Tuesday morning, timed with ruthless precision. It wasn't a sensational viral clip. It was a clean documented piece, audio from the intimidation call, photos of the studio, public records of complaint patterns, and a careful line of accountability that pointed not just at Carter's cruelty, but at the infrastructure that enabled it. Lena didn't call it a conspiracy in the headline. She didn't need to. She called it what it was, when influence becomes a weapon. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Local news, then regional, then national outlets hungry for a narrative that wasn't just ugly but fixable. The comment sections for once weren't only rage. They were offers: pro bono legal support, art restoration volunteers, disability rights advocates, veterans groups. People who had been silent in Charleston for years began to speak. Emails flooded Dana Whitaker's office. "This happened to my aunt. This happened to my neighbor. I thought I was the only one." The city's bruises were finally visible. And when bruises are visible, people stop pretending they don't hurt. The Langfords tried their first move, of course. They released a statement through Malcolm Pritchard that dripped with polished concern. Regret, misunderstanding, youthful mistakes, commitment to community. It might have worked in a quieter week, but Dana had taught Maya something important. You don't fight influence with emotion. You fight it with paper. On Thursday, Dana filed an amended charge sheet: repeat criminal mischief, witness intimidation, and an enhancement tied directly to threats against a service animal. Sergeant Caldwell quietly opened an internal review into Officer Rusk's handling of the initial report. Maya didn't celebrate that. She simply noted it the way you noted weather shifting. Something had changed. The bond hearing took place in a modest courtroom with beige walls and an American flag in the corner. No grand chandeliers. No cinematic echoes, just the hard machinery of law turning. Maya wore a navy sweater and a scarf Lena had lent her hair pulled back, her posture tall even in her chair. Sonny wore his service vest for the first time since the park. When the vest went over his shoulders, he stood a little straighter, as if the fabric itself reminded him who he was. His tail wagged once, slow, proud. Then he settled at Maya's left side, eyes scanning the room with calm professionalism. Jack sat behind them, silent. Dana Whitaker spoke in measured sentences that landed like stones. She laid out the timeline: the park assault, the intimidation call, the vandalism, the second break-in, the written threat. She played the voicemail. She held up printed photos of the red message. She referenced the veterinary records. She did not ask the judge to feel sorry for Maya. She asked the judge to see a pattern of escalating violence. Malcolm Pritchard, on the other side, tried his best version of reasonable. He argued that Carter was a college student, a good boy who made a mistake. He suggested Jack had provoked the second incident. He implied Maya's public statements had inflamed things. The judge, a woman with silver hair and tired eyes named Judge Rosalind Kerr, didn't flinch. She looked at Sonny when the threat message was shown. Her jaw tightened slightly, one human reaction in an otherwise controlled face. "Mr. Pritchard," she said, voice cool, "I am not persuaded that this is youthful mischief. I am persuaded that this is intimidation." Her gavel tapped once. Bail was set high. Conditions were strict. Electronic monitoring, no contact, no proximity. Mandatory surrender of any key cards or building access devices tied to the service entrance. When the ruling ended, Maya didn't cry. She simply released a breath she'd been holding since Hampton Park and placed her hand on Sonny's head. His ears flicked back toward her touch, and his eyes softened. They walked, or rather, rolled, out of the courtroom into cold sunlight that felt cleaner than it had in weeks. 2 days later, Maya returned to her studio, for the first time not as a victim surveying a grave, but as the owner of a space reclaiming itself. The smell was still there faintly, but it was diluted now by fresh paint and lemon cleaner. Volunteers from a local art collective had come in with masks and gloves and gentle hands. They couldn't resurrect every canvas. Some losses were permanent, but they could scrape away dried pigment, salvage frames, and restore the floor. A disability rights group had helped her landlord reinforce the secondary door and service entrance, adding proper deadbolts and a camera system tied directly to a third-party security company. No local friend of the family keys. The landlord, pale and sweating, apologized in a voice that sounded like it had been forced out of him by reality. "I didn't know," he kept saying. Maya didn't waste her breath on rage. "Now you do," she replied, and that was enough. The most painful part was the wall. The clean white wall that had once held her sketches, now marked, though the red paint was gone, with a ghost of letters only she could still see. Lena stood beside her quietly, hands in her coat pockets. "You don't have to keep this place," Lena said. "You could start over somewhere else." Maya stared at the wall. Sonny sat at her side, looking up at her. His habit, even off duty, was to watch her face. He read her breath before she spoke. Maya reached down, rubbed the soft fur behind his ear, and felt his tail tap against the floor. "If I leave," Maya said softly, "they win twice." Jack's voice came from behind them. "Then don't leave," he said. Maya turned. Jack stood in the doorway, hair still damp from the cold, posture relaxed for the first time since she'd met him. He carried a long, narrow package wrapped in brown paper. "What's that?" Maya asked. Jack walked forward and set it on her table. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a wide wooden panel, smooth, sanded, primed. "A new wall," he said simply. Maya blinked. "That's not a wall," she said, half laugh, half breath. "It's a panel." "It becomes what you make it," Jack replied. He glanced at Lena. "You said she projects sketches here?" Lena nodded. "Used to." Jack looked back to Maya. "Then put it back," he said, "but on your terms." The volunteers left them alone. The studio fell quiet except for Sonny's nails clicking softly when he shifted position. Maya rolled closer to the panel. Her fingers hovered over it as if she was afraid to touch hope. "I don't know what to paint," she admitted. Jack leaned against the counter, gaze steady. "Paint the truth," he said. "The one they tried to erase." Maya's breath caught. She thought of the park, Spanish moss, sunlight, her brush moving in calm strokes. She thought of Carter's slap, the sudden humiliation. She thought of Sonny's cry and Jack's silent speed. She thought of the red message and the way it tried to make Sonny a hostage. And she thought of what had happened after. Evidence, voices, the city listening. She lifted a pencil and began to draw. Not the violence, not the moment of pain. She drew Sonny first. Golden retriever, about 3 years old. Coat a bright honey color, with lighter feathering on his chest and tail. Eyes warm and intelligent. A service vest in the sketch, but not heavy, not defining. He was drawn in motion, stepping forward with calm purpose. Beside him, she drew her own hand reaching down. Not gripping, not clinging, just connected. She drew Jack in the background, not as a savior towering over them, but as a figure standing watch at the edge of light. A guardian who didn't need applause. And then she drew the thing she hadn't painted in years because it scared her to admit she wanted it. A future. She painted the panel over the next 2 days. Volunteers brought meals. Lena checked in and kept the media at bay. Dana Whitaker sent a brief text. Bond conditions upheld. Keep documenting everything. Sergeant Caldwell sent another. Internal review opened. We'll be in touch. The city's machinery kept turning. But inside the studio, the only machinery that mattered was Maya's hand moving with intention again. On the 3rd day when the panel was finished, Maya leaned back in her chair and stared at it until her eyes blurred. It wasn't perfect. The brushstrokes were raw in places. The colors were bolder than her old work. It looked like someone who had been broken and decided to build anyway. Sonny walked over, careful, still healing, and pressed his nose to the lower corner of the panel, sniffing. Then he sat, tail sweeping slowly across the floor. Approval. Maya laughed, a real laugh, the first one she didn't have to force. "You like it?" she asked him softly. Sonny huffed, then rested his head on her knee. Jack watched from the doorway, and for once his eyes held something lighter than vigilance. Lena lifted her phone and captured a photo, not of a ruined studio, not of a threat, but of a golden retriever at a woman's side beneath a painting that said, without words, "You don't get to take us." A month later, Maya's restored studio hosted a small community night, not a fundraiser with glittering donors. A simple gathering, neighbors, artists, disability advocates, a few veterans, and one quietly smiling Sergeant Caldwell, who came off duty and brought cookies in a plain cardboard box. Dana Whitaker didn't attend. She was in court. But she sent flowers with a note. "Keep going." The panel hung on the wall where the red threat had once been. Maya spoke for 5 minutes, voice steady. "They tried to scare me into silence," she said. "They tried to make my dog collateral, but Sonny is not a hostage. He's my partner." Sonny sat beside her, wearing his vest, calm as a lighthouse. "And this community," Maya added, eyes scanning the room, "is not for sale." Applause rose. Not loud at first, then stronger. Jack stood near the back, arms folded, watching the room the way he always watched for danger. But tonight, his shoulders were looser, his jaw unclenched. After the crowd thinned, Maya rolled outside into the crisp night air with Sunny trotting carefully at her side. The street was quiet. The old fear still lived somewhere in her body, like a scar you could feel when weather changed, but it wasn't steering anymore. Jack stepped out beside her, hands in his pockets. "You did it," he said. Maya looked up at him. "We did," she corrected, nodding towards Sunny. Sunny's tail wagged once as if he understood the credit. Jack's mouth twitched in something close to a smile. "Fair," he said. Maya glanced back through her studio window. Light spilled out onto the sidewalk, warm and steady. Her work was back on the walls. The new panel glowed like a promise. For the first time in a long time, Maya didn't feel like she was living inside someone else's power. She was living inside her own. She reached down and rubbed Sunny's ear. He leaned into her hand, eyes half closing in contentment. Then, very gently, he took one step forward, as if leading her home.